We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. Rain fell steadily on the glass roof of St. Vincent Hospital, persistent, tired, as if even the sky had grown weary of witnessing so many human tears. Lila Carter tightened the blanket around her son and hurried down the corridor, which reeked faintly of antiseptic. The child in her arms burned with fever, his breath coming in ragged gasps, eyelids heavy from exhaustion. She had been working all week at a small cafe near the square, sleeping no more than 3 hours a night. Now seeing Caleb lying on the hospital bed with a thin oxygen tube at his nose, all she could feel inside was a vast, echoing emptiness. Lila sank into the cold plastic chair beside the bed, her trembling hand brushing through her son's soft hair. "You'll be okay, won't you?" she whispered, but even her own voice sounded like something she could no longer believe in. From the emergency room next door came a sterile rhythm, the shuffle of doctors' shoes, the rustle of charts, the steady beep of a heart monitor. It all sounded like a soulless piece of music repeating endlessly, as if everyone had forgotten why they were still alive. Lila bowed her head to her knees, shoulders shaking. For 3 years, she hadn't allowed herself to break. But tonight, hearing her child's hoarse cries, something inside her finally collapsed. The elevator doors slid open. A group of people stepped out, leather shoes clicking, phones buzzing, voices low but full of command. At the center was Travis Holt. He walked slowly, eyes fixed on the iPad in his hand. The collar of his white shirt was unbuttoned, and his dark hair was streaked faintly with gray. He looked exactly the same as he had 3 years ago, except now the fatigue in his gaze was deeper, sharper, like a man who had learned to hide his soul behind cold precision. Lila looked up, her breath caught in her chest. She never thought she would see him again. Not here, not like this, and certainly not with the child who carried his eyes lying in that hospital bed. Travis stopped when he saw her. At first it was just a passing glance, detached, like with any stranger. Then his gaze lingered. Longer than it should have. Something familiar tugged at him. The thin frame, the tired face, the eyes that once looked at him with a tenderness he had refused to see. "Lila," he said at last, voice low, rough, uncertain of his own memory. She rose to her feet, pale but steady, her tear-filled eyes shining. "It's been a while, Mr. Holt." Her voice was so quiet that only he could hear it, yet it was enough to make him freeze. His eyes flicked to the child on the bed, the small face struggling to breathe. A chill ran down his spine. "That child, is he?" "You don't need to ask," she cut him off, still watching her son. "You already put a price on him once, didn't you?" Travis said nothing. The air between them grew heavy. The man who once signed a check to erase a life could now do nothing but stand there, haunted by the sound of rain and memories he thought he'd buried. Then the door behind him burst open. A group of reporters rushed in, cameras flashing like lightning. "Mr. Holt, there are rumors that you have a secret child with your former housemaid. Can you confirm if the boy in the emergency room is your son?" Lila froze. Hot tears welled up, but she swallowed them back. She wouldn't let them see her break. Not again. Travis looked at her, then at the cameras pointed straight at his face. He could say yes. He could tell the truth. End the lie. Step out of the cage of reputation with one sentence. But 3 years had trained him to react with logic, not with heart. "No," he said quietly, then louder. "No, I don't know her. She used to work for me, and now she's trying to use my name." Whispers spread. Cameras flashed faster. For a moment, the world seemed to crumble beneath Lila's feet. She lifted Caleb, pulled the blanket over his small body, and walked slowly through the crowd. No one stopped her. No one said a word. Only the sound of rain hitting the glass roof remained, and the sharp scent of disinfectant clinging to her like a nameless humiliation. Travis watched her go, his throat tightening. He couldn't take his eyes off her. The woman who once tied his tie each morning, who smiled softly when he frowned at weak coffee. The woman he thought he could forget. And the child, those gray eyes, mirrored the part of himself he'd spent years trying to bury. "Mr. Holt, shall we go?" his assistant whispered. He didn't answer. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Travis stood there staring into the space where Lila had vanished, feeling as if the world had just dropped something he could never recover. That night, when he returned to his penthouse, the silence pressed in around him. Everything was immaculate, perfect, just like his life was supposed to be. On the table lay the afternoon paper, Billionaire's Secret Baby? He picked it up, fingers trembling slightly. Below the headline was a grainy photo, Lila holding Caleb, her face half hidden by messy hair. But the boy's eyes looked straight into the lens, storm gray, deep, clear, and frighteningly familiar. Travis folded the paper shut. He leaned against the wall and exhaled slowly. Only one sentence echoed in his mind, her voice from that hospital hallway. "You already put a price on him once, didn't you?" And for the first time in years, Travis Holt wasn't sure if he was still the man he thought he had control over. That winter in New York was colder than any in recent memory. Snow covered the worn sidewalks, and the wind from the Hudson swept between tall buildings, carrying the damp scent of loneliness. Lila Carter pulled her old wool scarf tighter around her neck as the bus stopped in front of the Holt residence. A secluded mansion in the Upper East Side, its gray stone walls and towering iron gates as cold as the man who owned it. She pressed the doorbell. The sound echoed across the snow-covered courtyard. A butler opened the door, elderly, stern, his eyes assessing. "You're Carter." "Yes, Lila Carter." "Mr. Holt doesn't like people being late. Follow me." Inside, the house was another world. Elegant, immaculate, and frighteningly silent. Dark wood-paneled walls, high ceilings, and a crystal chandelier that reflected faint light. Every footstep echoed like a warning to tread carefully. Lila followed the butler down a long hallway, lined with abstract paintings until they stopped before a heavy walnut door. "Mr. Holt is working. You'll wait there." Through the narrow gap of the half-open door, she saw Travis Holt for the first time. He sat behind a massive desk, dressed in a white shirt and black tie, the winter light from the window outlining the sharp lines of his face. She had never seen anyone quite like him. Proud, distant, weary, like a marble statue pretending it still held warmth. "This is the new one, sir," the butler said. Travis didn't look up. "Fine. 6-month contract. Renew if she performs well. If not, let her go." The words were simple, emotionless, but enough for Lila to understand that in this house, people were measured only by time and efficiency. Her work began the next morning. At 5 a.m., she rose to brew coffee, mop the marble floors, change the flowers in the living room, prepare the dining table, and organize papers on her employer's desk. The butler repeated his warnings. "Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look at him for more than 3 seconds. Don't ask personal questions." Lila only nodded. She worked quietly, diligently, straightening the edge of a tablecloth, polishing door handles, aligning pens in the exact direction he preferred. There was no laughter in that mansion, no music, no sign of life beyond work and silence. It didn't take long for her to realize that Travis Holt wasn't just wealthy. He had built a fortress of solitude around himself. One afternoon, while replacing the flowers in his study, the door suddenly opened. Travis entered, coat draped over one shoulder, the faint scent of rain and smoke following him. Startled, Lila turned. The crystal vase slipped from her hands and shattered across the floor. She gasped, kneeling to gather the shards. "I'm so sorry. I'll replace it." "No need," he said, his voice low, detached. "It's just an object." He sat down and opened his laptop. The glow of the screen cast a pale blue on his cheek. Lila stayed crouched, her fingers bleeding slightly where a shard had cut her. He frowned, glancing her way. "You're hurt." "It's nothing. Just a scratch." "Go wash your hands. I'll have the butler clean up." His tone wasn't exactly kind, but for a fleeting second, she sensed that beneath the detachment, there was still a man capable of noticing another person. In the days that followed, she began to notice small things about him. Travis worked past midnight every night. He ate quickly, rarely spoke to anyone, and often sat for hours by the window overlooking the city. The light reflecting in his storm-gray eyes, cold yet unbearably sad. Once she dared to ask, "Would you like me to switch your coffee to a lighter roast, Mr. Holt? This one's rather strong." He looked at her over the rim of his glasses but didn't respond. The next morning, when she brewed the same blend, he said quietly, "Keep the one from yesterday." It was indirect but clear enough. He noticed her, more than he wanted to admit. 2 years passed like that, quiet, repetitive, yet within the silence, something fragile began to grow. Lila didn't know why. Out of all the staff, she was the only one allowed into his study each morning. She never dared to think beyond her duties, but every time he said, "Thank you," those two small words, her heart skipped a beat. And Travis, though he would never admit it, started to feel that her presence made the house a little less empty. She didn't speak much, but she seemed to understand even the words he never said. He grew accustomed to waking up to an organized desk, coffee placed exactly right, and a small lavender bloom in a glass jar by the window. Only when she took 2 sick days did he realize what absence truly felt like. One February evening, the courtyard was blanketed in snow. Travis returned from a long shareholders' meeting, his expression heavy, the scent of whiskey lingering in the air. Lila was still in the kitchen, finishing up. "You're still awake?" he asked. "I wanted to make sure the kitchen's clean before tomorrow morning, sir." He poured himself another drink, voice softer now. "How long have you worked here, Lila?" "Almost 2 years, sir." 2 years, he repeated, eyes pausing on her face. "You're not afraid of me?" "No," she said, smiling faintly. "I'm only afraid of not doing my job right." He chuckled quietly, a rare sound in that frozen house. But the smile faded quickly. He drained his glass and set it down with a sharp clink. As she stepped forward to clear the table, his hand brushed hers. For a heartbeat, silence. They both froze. Travis looked down the warm yellow light, catching her brown eyes, reflected faintly in the silver of his own. Something small but undeniable sparked between them. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet crack in the ice. She drew her hand back. "I'm sorry." "No, it's me." He turned away, voice lower. "You should get some rest, Lila." But that night, as he walked down the long hallway to his room, he couldn't stop seeing her eyes in his mind. Those warm brown eyes, the only thing still alive in a house made of frost. That night, the rain seemed endless. Raindrops struck the glass windows of the Holt mansion, shattering into 1,000 glimmers that caught the reflections of the city's distant lights. New York lay under a chill fog, and the mansion, as always, remained perfectly still. The clock on the wall showed midnight. Lila was still in the kitchen, tidying the spice rack, wiping tiny droplets off the marble counter. The sound of the wind outside filled the silence inside her chest. This work had become her habit, to clean, to organize, to stay busy. Because the moment she stopped, she would remember her mother and the hospital bills still unpaid. The front door opened. The sharp sound of footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Travis Holt had returned. He didn't turn on the bright lights, only the soft amber glow from the hall. His coat was soaked from the rain, his tie loosened, and one hand held a half bottle of whiskey. The gala that night had been a failure. The deal with the Swiss conglomerate he'd spent 6 months negotiating had collapsed. The media would talk, shareholders would whisper, competitors would smirk. But all he wanted was for the noise to stop. Travis stopped at the doorway of the kitchen. The white ceiling light illuminated Lila's face as she folded a dish towel, her back slightly bent, a few strands of hair falling across her cheek. He stood there for a long moment, saying nothing, just listening to the rain and the faint clink of a spoon in the sink. "You're still up?" he asked, voice rough, thick with liquor. "I was just finishing up, sir." He set the bottle down on the counter, pulled off his tie, his tone slower now. "Everyone leaves eventually, even the ones who swear loyalty." "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "No one does." He gave a hollow laugh. "Not even you." Lila turned. His gaze was no longer cold and sharp, but that of a man too exhausted to keep hiding himself. "If you'd like, I can make ginger tea," she offered softly. "It helps with hangovers." He looked at her, long, searching, then murmured, "You're the only one in this house who isn't afraid to look at me." Lila froze. The words seemed simple, yet something in them felt unbearably honest. Through the haze of whiskey and dim light, She saw a man trembling beneath the armor of his own indifference. He stepped closer. No words, no intent. The space between them shrank. Whiskey on his breath, mingling with the faint scent of soap on her hands, the woody cologne clinging to his shirt. "Mr. Holt." "Travis," he interrupted. "Call me Travis." A drop of water slid from his wet hair onto her wrist. Cold. Then he leaned down and kissed her. Slowly. Not with passion, but with a kind of broken longing, like someone searching for a place to rest. Lila trembled but didn't pull away. In that moment, she wasn't a maid, and he wasn't a billionaire. They were just two lonely souls finding each other in the rain. The kiss was clumsy, warm, and unbearably painful, as if each breath they shared was an attempt to forget their own loneliness. When she woke, dawn had arrived. Pale light filtered through the curtains, scattering across the wooden floor. Lila sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. The room was silent, except for the ticking of the clock. His white shirt hung over the chair. Travis stood by the window, looking out at the gray, misty skyline. "I'm sorry," he said without turning around. "Last night, let's pretend it never happened." Lila bit her lip, her heart tightening, but her voice remained calm. "I understand." He turned to face her, the coldness back in his eyes. "You can take the rest of the day off. I have work to do." That was all. No explanation, no glance back. He picked up his coat and left, the faint scent of cologne and whiskey lingering in the air, a scent that would haunt her for years. That day, Lila continued her routine as if nothing had changed. She cleaned, prepared dinner, and spoke to no one. But when she passed the hallway where it had all begun, her hand brushed against the edge of the table, the place where he had set down his glass, where everything had started. Travis buried himself in work, signing contracts, joining video meetings, talking of profits and percentages as if life were still perfectly orderly. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lila's eyes, warm brown, gentle and sad, looking at him in the dark. He didn't know why he had kissed her. He only knew that for the first time in years he had felt alive. But Travis Holt was not a man who allowed himself to live by emotion, so he chose silence. And Lila, she chose her own silence. Through a quiet smile, through steady work, through the quiet ache she carried in her heart. Spring came early that year, but it brought no warmth. Along Park Avenue, the trees still stood bare, and the New York sky was a flat sheet of gray glass. 3 months had passed since that rainy night, the night that changed everything in Lila Carter's life. She sat on the edge of her small rented bed, hands trembling as she held the ultrasound printout. The image was grainy, faint, just a small blur against a black background. But she knew it was her child, a part of her, a part of him, the result of a moment that was both tender and cruel. Her heart pounded. She wasn't afraid, just awed by the weight of something so much bigger than herself. There was only one thought in her mind: he needed to know. Not to ask for anything, not to demand, only to tell him the truth. That afternoon, Lila returned to the Holt mansion. The house was exactly the same. Silent, elegant, lifeless. The old butler opened the door, his expression startled. "I thought you'd already resigned." "I need to speak with Mr. Holt, just for a moment." She stood in the living room, clutching the hem of her coat. The familiar scent of oak wood and leather filled the air, making her heart tremble. Travis entered a few minutes later. Black suit, silver tie, face unreadable. "What is it, Lila?" His voice was steady, low, as if they had never touched, never shared that night of rain. Lila drew a slow breath. "I just came to tell you something. I'm pregnant." Silence. Only the ticking of the clock between them. Travis stared at her for a long moment, expression unreadable. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she continued softly but clearly. "I just thought you should know." He exhaled and turned toward his desk. Without a word, without a single question, he opened a drawer and pulled out a checkbook. The pen moved quickly, sharp, decisive strokes of black ink. When he looked up again, his eyes had turned to ice. "Take this money," he said, voice measured. "Handle the pregnancy and disappear from my life." Lila froze. Outside, the sound of traffic drifted faintly through the window. car horns, tires splashing in the drizzle. But inside there was only emptiness. The check lay on the desk between them. $100,000. A sum that could change her entire life. Yet at that moment, it made her feel nothing but disgust. She looked at him, the man who had once touched her with trembling hands, who had once spoken her name like it meant something. Now he spoke to her as if she were a defective object. "You can buy silence," she whispered, "but you can't buy conscience." Travis's brow tightened as if to reply, but she had already turned away. Her steps were light, her back straight, her head unbowed. She didn't look back. The check remained there, untouched, a silent witness to everything that had just broken. Outside, the rain began to fall harder. Layla stepped into the street, the wind slapping against her face, cold and sharp. She didn't know where she would go. No money, no home, only her hands and the tiny heartbeat growing inside her. And yet somehow, she had never felt stronger. She placed a hand over her belly and whispered, "We'll be all right. Even if we have to start from nothing." From the high window above, Travis stood watching. Her figure grew smaller and smaller in the rain. He didn't understand why his chest ached. Only that, in that moment, he had lost something no amount of money could ever buy back. The night train carried Lila out of New York at the start of summer. Outside the window, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and gray, melting into the darkness like memories being pulled from her heart. She didn't know where she was going, only that she would get off wherever her heart whispered, "Here, you can begin again." And so she stepped off in Vermont, a quiet lakeside town on the edge of Lake Champlain, a place where no one knew her name and no one cared who she had been. The first days were hard. She rented a tiny room above a cafe called Maple and Dawn, its wooden walls creaking with every breeze, the window frame forever jammed. By day, she waited tables, washed dishes, and carried trays of coffee. By night, she helped the cafe owner tend the small garden behind the shop, in exchange for a few dollars and a warm meal. Life was difficult, but peaceful. There were no judgmental stares, no cold words chasing after her. She grew accustomed to the smell of pastries baking at dawn, the soft ding of the doorbell when customers arrived, and the roughness of her palms, which somehow made her feel lighter inside. When her belly began to show, the cafe owner asked, "Where's the baby's father, Lila?" She smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Somewhere far away, but I don't need him to be a mother," no one asked again. In small towns like this, people believed in hard work and kindness more than in anyone's past. A neighbor helped her buy baby clothes. The cafe owner let her leave early each evening. And for the first time in years, Lila felt that she was living, not merely surviving. One autumn night, she went into labor in her small room overlooking the lake. Outside, the moon was full, its silver light reflected in the water. After hours of pain, a cry filled the air. Fragile, pure, sacred enough to make her weep. Caleb. That was the name she chose, meaning the one with a faithful heart. When the nurse placed the baby in her arms, Lila froze. He was so small, soft pink skin, chestnut hair, but what took her breath away were his eyes. When Caleb opened them for the first time, she saw in them the same storm gray hue, clear and deep as the morning mist over the lake. His eyes, not a shade different. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Both emotions mingled, sacred and painful all at once. Holding her son close to her chest, she whispered through tears, "Welcome to the world, my little boy. No matter what anyone says, you were born from love, not rejection." The months that followed were simple, quiet, and full of small miracles. In the mornings, Lila brewed coffee for the cafe's regulars. Sometimes someone would hold Caleb and exclaim, "He's beautiful, like a snow doll." At noon, she'd walk him to the lakeshore, humming the lullabies her mother once sang. And at night, after Caleb fell asleep, she sat by the window and wrote in her journal, "If one day you ask where your father is, I'll tell you he once existed, but you were born out of courage, not pity. You're the only thing in my life that didn't come from fear." Sometimes when she caught the light reflected in Caleb's gray eyes, her heart tightened, not from hate, but from a gentle kind of sorrow. Somewhere in that cold world of skyscrapers and glass, The man she once knew was probably still living in luxury, unaware that there was a small life, carrying his eyes, smiling in the arms of the woman he had denied. She never wrote to him, never called, never tried to send word, because she understood. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is to leave and let them face the emptiness they created. Winter came. Snow blanketed the rooftops, and Caleb laughed for the first time. That laughter, light, bright, untainted, washed away every sound of her past. She held him close, pressed her cheek against his milk-scented skin, and tears streamed down her face. This time, tears of joy. In her journal, she wrote the last line of that year. "You have your father's eyes. But when you look at me, I know. The light in them isn't his. It's yours. The most beautiful thing I've ever created." 9 months had passed since Caleb's first cry. Vermont had turned to autumn. Maple leaves burned crimson, falling thick over the narrow road that led to the lake. Every morning, Lila carried her son to the cafe. Caleb could already babble, "Mama," his tiny hands reaching out to catch the drifting golden leaves. Their life was simple, warm, and quiet. So much so that sometimes Lila truly believed the pain of the past had finally stayed behind. But fate rarely lets anyone rest for long. That afternoon, a stranger visited the cafe. He was well-dressed, with dark glasses and a city accent. He ordered coffee and smiled, and too politely, when he saw Caleb in his cradle. "What a special pair of eyes the boy has," he said. "Rare color. Just like someone I once met." Lila merely nodded. Yet that night, long after closing, the man's look still lingered in her mind like an itch she couldn't shake. A week later, a photo appeared online showing Lila holding Caleb outside the cafe. It spread like wildfire. Underneath, hundreds of comments. "Those eyes, no mistake. He's Travis Holt's son, the billionaire's hidden baby. Who's the woman in the picture? Former employee? The maid?" Within one night, every major outlet ran the story. Lila was stunned. The cafe phone rang nonstop. Reporters flooded the quiet little town that had never known scandal until now. Meanwhile, in New York, Travis Holt sat in his 60th floor office when his assistant laid a stack of newspapers before him. Across the front page, a black and white photo, a young woman holding a baby with storm gray eyes. His eyes. "What is this?" he asked quietly. "The news has gone viral, sir. The shareholders expect a statement within 24 hours. The press is camped outside headquarters." He turned the paper, staring at the photo for a long time. His hand tightened until his knuckles turned white. "Impossible," he muttered, though even he didn't believe it. That afternoon's board meeting was tense as a wire. One man rose, his tone sharp. "If this story is true, Mr. Holt, we expect an explanation. An illegitimate child could collapse the company's stock overnight." Travis said nothing. He had always known how to control a crisis. But this time, every time he closed his eyes, he saw that child's face. Those eyes, not accusing, but pure, staring straight through him. Finally he spoke. "Deny it. Issue a statement. False, fabricated, baseless." The words left his mouth like cold steel, but when they hit his heart, they burned. He didn't know if he was protecting the company or protecting himself from the truth he couldn't bear to face. In the days that followed, the media storm grew relentless. News outlets raced to find the mystery woman in the photo. Lila had to quit her job, lock the cafe doors, and hide with her son in their tiny rented room. Every knock on the door made her heart skip a beat. Eventually, a reporter found her. "Ms. Carter, is the child Mr. Holt's? What's your relationship with him? Why did you disappear?" She only shook her head, clutching Caleb tightly. "Please, go away. I have nothing to say." But silence in the eyes of the public is never neutral. Her refusal to speak only made them believe she had something to hide. Her name, his name, and the child's splashed across every headline. Travis stopped sleeping. Each night he sat alone in his office, watching the city lights burn below. Every window shimmered with questions. Did she really want to use me? Or have I been wrong all along? The memory of that rainy night came flooding back. Her smile, her hands handing him coffee, her soft voice like a quiet breeze. And then, that image again. The child's face, those storm gray eyes, so clear, so impossibly honest. No, he whispered almost to himself. No, it can't be. Shareholders began threatening to pull out. The press surrounded Holt Tower. A PR advisor suggested a public appearance to shut down the rumors. Travis agreed, partly out of pressure, partly out of something else, a strange gnawing need to see the child for himself. And so, on a rainy morning, he arrived at St. Vincent Hospital, where he was a sponsor for a medical initiative. He didn't know that at the same time, down the hall on the third floor, a young woman was signing admission papers for her feverish son. The name on the form, Caleb Carter. That was where they met again. Their eyes met, the first time in 3 years. Just 1 second, but enough for him to know. Those eyes, his own eyes, reflected back at him from a child's face. The media frenzy, the denial, the flash of cameras, and those cold, hollow words. I don't know her. All of it, what happened that day in the hospital, became the first crack in Travis Holt's proud armor. And from that moment on, the story was no longer about truth or lies, but about the price of denial. 3 days after the hospital scandal, New York still hadn't stopped talking. Everywhere Travis Holt went, the screens, the cafes, the boardrooms, he heard his own name. But what kept him awake at night wasn't the noise of the world. It was those eyes, the child's storm gray eyes, clear, deep, and hauntingly familiar. Eyes he couldn't meet without feeling something inside him collapse. Every time he closed his own, they appeared again. Not angry, not accusing, just sad. A sadness so pure it stripped away every layer of arrogance he'd built his life upon. For the first time, the man who thought he was unbreakable felt small. When the shareholders demanded a DNA test, Travis didn't resist. Not for them, but because he needed to end the lie he'd been clinging to. He already knew. From that brief moment in the hospital hallway, when the boy opened his eyes, he knew. He didn't need a laboratory or percentages to confirm what his soul had recognized instantly. He had seen his own gaze staring back at him, as if God himself had returned to him the face of the man he used to be, back when he still believed in goodness. But knowing was one thing, admitting was another. He was Travis Holt, the man who never bowed, never faltered, never erred. The name itself had been built on reputation, and reputation had become his cage. When the envelope arrived, he didn't open it right away. He left it on his desk, staring at the thin white paper as though it were a verdict waiting to be carried out. All afternoon, his office stayed silent. The late sunlight poured through the glass, touching the corner of the envelope like a golden blade. Finally, he reached for it slowly, carefully, as if he were unsealing his own heart. The sheet slipped out, a few lines of sterile black text. DNA match, 99.99%. Conclusion, paternity is almost certain. Travis didn't flinch. He simply closed his eyes, exhaling a breath that trembled on its way out. Everything he'd fought to deny was now printed clearly, legally, irrevocably. There was no room left for silence, no excuse left for running. He sat there for a long time, unmoving. Outside, the light shifted from gold to violet, then to black. Inside, only the sound of the clock, and his heartbeat, steady but heavy, filled the room. He felt the weight pressing in his chest. Not fear, but something deeper, heavier. And yet, for the first time, he didn't want to fight it. I already knew, he whispered, his voice raw. I just didn't have the courage to say it. After a while, Travis picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts, stopping at a name he had never deleted. Lila Carter. His hand trembled, but he didn't call. He didn't know what to say or where to begin. He stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the city burning with light. Each light was a life, a truth, and among all those truths, there was one he could no longer deny. That child was his son. That night he drove alone out of Manhattan. The wind whipped against his shoulders, cold and cutting. Papers rustled across the seat beside him. The DNA report, glowing faintly under the passing streetlights. He pulled over by the bridge and stepped out. Below him, the river was black as glass, rippling with the reflection of countless lights. each one like an eye staring back at him. He lowered his head and whispered, barely audible, "My son, I'm sorry. I saw you, and I still chose silence. But from now on, I won't hide anymore." A tear slid down his cheek, the first in years. Travis Holt, the man who once believed that tears were weakness, finally understood. Sometimes tears don't mean defeat. They mean you finally found the courage to be honest. When dawn broke, he drove back to his office. A faint red mark lingered on his wrist where the blood sample had been drawn, like a quiet brand of truth. He laid the DNA results on his desk, picked up the phone, and said to his assistant, voice calm but resolute, "Prepare a press conference. Noon today, no hesitation, no fear." He knew what he was about to lose: reputation, stock value, image, but he also knew what he would gain back: something far greater, the right to be a father. That morning, before leaving his apartment, Travis looked into the mirror. The faint swelling beneath his eyes betrayed a sleepless night. The silver gray in his gaze no longer looked cold, but clear, raw, human. He whispered to his reflection, "You have these eyes and so does my son. Today I'll use them to look truth in the face." That morning, the city seemed to hold its breath. News of Travis Holt's emergency press conference dominated every broadcast. Journalists gathered outside the Holt Corporation headquarters before dawn. Rumors spread that he would deny everything, sue for defamation, or blame the media, the way powerful men usually did. No one expected him to actually show up. At 11 o'clock, Travis stepped onto the stage. The sky outside was heavy, gray, on the verge of rain. Flashes burst in rapid succession, blinding white, like hundreds of judging eyes turned toward him. He wore a black suit, no tie. For the first time, there was no script, no lawyer, no PR team standing behind him. Just a man, and the truth. "Thank you for coming," he began, voice low and rough, as if sanded by the night. "I won't speak for long. I just want to tell the truth." The room fell utterly silent. Travis looked directly into the camera, his eyes no longer cold, but steady, calm, as though after a long storm. "3 years ago, I made a mistake," he said quietly. "I believed I could control everything, even people, even emotions. And when she became pregnant, I chose silence." He paused. The only sound was the faint click of cameras. The entire room waited, as if the world itself were holding its breath for his self-verdict. "She didn't betray me." His voice cracked slightly. "I betrayed my own heart." The words cut through the thick electric air. Short, honest, irrefutable. Travis drew in a breath, glancing briefly toward the front row, where his PR team sat rigid, their hands clasped tight. "The child in those photos is my son. His name is Caleb." A wave of sound swept the room. The shuffle of reporters, the rush of whispers, the storm of camera shutters. But Travis stood still. No hiding. No retreat. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he continued, voice steady again. "But if anyone needs to know the truth, that's it. I haven't lost everything because of this scandal. I only lost what mattered most, the chance to watch my son grow up." Then he bowed his head. It wasn't a gesture of performance, but of surrender, of humility. The bow of a man who had finally learned how to bend so he could stand again as a father. That afternoon it rained in Vermont too. At the Maple and Dawn Cafe, the owner turned on the television just for Lila. On the screen, Travis stood beneath the flash of cameras, his voice breaking. Raw, real, painfully human. Lila held Caleb on her lap, the screen's glow soft against her face. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just watched, quietly for a long time. The child clapped his little hands, laughing at the bright lights on the TV. Lila smiled faintly, pressing her cheek to his hair, whispering under her breath, "No one needs to hear an apology. We just need to see the change." Night fell. The television went dark, leaving only the sound of rain against the eaves. Lila laid Caleb gently in his crib, then sat by the window, pen poised over her journal. He spoke today, not to earn forgiveness, but to start over. Maybe forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, but about looking straight at it and still choosing to move forward. Outside, raindrops trailed down the glass, catching the reflection of distant headlights. And in that quiet, she realized she wasn't angry anymore. Only peace remained, fragile, but real. As if at last, both of them had found their own light. Afternoon in Vermont, rain drifted softly, thin and silver, threading through the red-brown maple trees. The wind brushed against the wooden porch, setting the small summer wind chime swaying with a faint, lonely song. Inside, Lila had just put Caleb to sleep. The boy clutched his stuffed bunny tight in his little arms. The scent of waffles lingered in the warm air, mixed with rain and damp wood, the smell of home. Life had settled into something simple and quiet again, so peaceful that Lila almost believed the storms of the world had forgotten them. Then came the knock, soft, hesitant. Once, then again. It wasn't the impatient pounding of reporters, nor the easy rhythm of friends. It was slow, the kind of knock that belonged to someone afraid of disturbing what was fragile. Lila froze for a moment, then walked to the door, her heart tightening. When she opened it, she went still. Travis Holt stood there, in the rain, his coat soaked through, hair disheveled, no bodyguards, no limousine, no dark glasses. Just a man, weary, drenched, holding something tightly in his hand, a small faded teddy bear with a frayed ear. They stood looking at each other for a long time. No words, only the sound of rain pattering on the wooden steps, filling the silence between two people who had once loved, once broken, once lost each other. Travis spoke first. His voice was rough, unsteady, nothing like the man who once commanded entire boardrooms. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, Lila. I'm just here to learn how to be a father." She didn't move. Her hand rested quietly on the doorframe. No tears, no accusations, just a steady gaze. Calm, maybe even a little sad, but no longer angry. He took a breath, slower this time. "I spent my whole life learning to control everything, but when I saw him, I realized some things can't be controlled. They can only be loved." Lila's eyes dropped to the teddy bear in his hand. "That bear. It was mine when I was a boy," Travis said softly. "I thought maybe Caleb would like it." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in. He's asleep, but you can see him." Travis entered slowly. The small house felt impossibly warm, so unlike the cold, perfect penthouse he called home. On the table were a few childish crayon drawings, a tiny sweater drying by the window, and the faint, even rhythm of a child's breathing. He stopped by the crib. Caleb slept soundly, cheeks flushed, small hands gripping his bunny. A soft curl of hair lay across his forehead. Even in sleep, his half-lidded eyes shimmered faintly silver gray, the same color as Travis's. Travis knelt down, his hand trembling. He didn't dare touch, only placed the teddy bear beside the crib and whispered, "I'm sorry I came 2 years too late." Lila stood quietly by the door watching him. For the first time, she saw something new in Travis Holt. Humility. The proud man who once built walls out of ego now looked like someone stripped bare, trying to learn love from scratch, with empty hands and an open heart. He looked up, eyes glistening with rain. "I don't know where to begin," he murmured. Lila's voice was soft, almost like a breath. "Start here. Caleb will teach you how to love." Outside, the rain continued to fall. Not the cold, merciless kind of years past, but a gentle rain, like a benediction for something new. On the table, the half-finished scarf Lila had been knitting lay beside a ball of yarn, the threads crossing and weaving together again, like two lives once torn apart, now slowly being mended by something simple: trust. When Travis left later that evening, the teddy bear remained beside Caleb. Lila stood at the doorway, watching his figure fade into the mist and rain. Neither of them promised anything. No words of reunion, no vows of forever. But inside her, something small began to bloom. A quiet faith that maybe love doesn't always need to begin again with the heart. Sometimes it begins again with courage. Spring came early that year in Vermont. The snow melted fast, leaving behind damp earth and the faint sweetness of pine. Morning light spilled like honey across the wooden porch, where Caleb sat playing with a pile of colorful blocks. From the doorway, Lila watched and smiled. Because sitting cross-legged beside the little boy, frowning in deep concentration, was Travis Holt, the same man whose name once made boardrooms tremble. Now he was struggling with a diaper. He bent awkwardly, brow furrowed, holding the clean diaper as though it were the most complicated investment document of his life. "He won't stay still," he muttered, helpless. "That's because you forgot to sing," Lila teased, crouching down to help. Caleb giggled, kicking his feet so that a puff of baby powder coated Travis's expensive shirt. The billionaire looked down at the mess, then laughed, a real laugh, unscripted, unguarded. "I used to think love had to be something grand," he said softly. "Turns out all it takes is a child's laugh to make the world disappear." Lila said nothing. She just watched him. This man who had once been made of ice, now melting in the simplest, clumsiest way possible. Days passed and Travis stayed longer than planned. He rented a small cabin near the cafe, arriving every morning to help Lila set the tables before the first customers arrived. In the afternoons, he took Caleb down to the lake to feed the ducks. People in the town began to notice. At first, they whispered about the city man in rolled-up sleeves who couldn't tell a spatula from a spoon. But soon they grew used to him, the father learning to be human. He learned to cook porridge, but nearly burned the pot the first time he tried. He tried singing lullabies, but always sang off-key, waking Caleb instead of lulling him to sleep. But he never gave up. Every failure became another small, clumsy step toward tenderness. One night, Lila woke to the sound of a voice. She crept to the doorway and came to a stop. Travis was standing in the next room, rocking Caleb gently in his arms, whispering through the dark, "Hush now, little one. The storm is gone. The stars are home." His voice was low and rough, but warm, the kind of warmth that comes only from regret turned into care. Lila leaned against the frame, tears filling her eyes, not from pain but from the quiet realization that the most beautiful form of apology isn't spoken, it's lived with trembling hands that are terrified to hurt again. The next morning, while Travis poured coffee, Lila said quietly, "You've changed a lot." He smiled, adding milk to her cup. "I'm not trying to change. I'm just trying to be worthy of what I've been given. I don't need you perfect, Travis. I know." He glanced toward the yard where Caleb was chasing butterflies. "But you and he make me want to be better." That afternoon, they took Caleb to the lake. The water was still, reflecting the sky and the bright kites of laughing children nearby. Caleb sat between them, his tiny hands gripping theirs. Travis leaned down, kissed his son's forehead, then looked at Lila. Their eyes met, and no words were needed. In that single glance, forgiveness had already begun. That night, Lila wrote in her journal, "He's no longer the man I once feared. He's learning to be a father, and somehow in doing so, he's learning to be human again." Love doesn't always have to begin from the heart. Sometimes it simply begins from the hands that dare to touch without hurting. Outside, Vermont lay wrapped in stillness. Moonlight fell through the window, silvering the chair where Travis had fallen asleep. Caleb resting on his chest, their breaths rising and falling in sync. Lila walked over, laid a blanket gently across their shoulders and smiled. Caleb stirred, his silver-gray eyes fluttering open in a dream, catching the faint shimmer of light. The kind of light born not of perfection, but of love, being learned one heartbeat at a time. Dawn rose slowly over Vermont like a whispered promise. Thin, honey-colored light streamed through the window, crawling across the warm wooden floor and the armchair where Travis had fallen asleep. Caleb resting quietly on his chest, their breaths rising and falling in the same rhythm. Lila stood in the doorway, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, silently watching the scene she once thought could only exist in a dream about a father who chose to stay. Travis stirred when Caleb shifted, the boy's tiny hand clutching his father's shirt as if afraid to lose his anchor. He bent down, kissed the child's milk-scented hair, and lifted his gaze. Outside, the lake lay still as glass, the ripples of sunrise opening into something that looked like a new beginning. "You're up early," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. Old cafe habit, Lila smiled, handing him the coffee. No deliveries this morning? No, he said, his tone deepening. Today's the day I say something I've been holding in for a long time. She didn't press. She'd learned that the most important words always find their own way to be spoken. For Travis, power had once been a shield, something he believed would protect him from being hurt. But he had realized the nature of a shield is cold. And in those nights when his son breathed steadily against his chest, he saw clearly. He had never been this warm before, not behind glass walls, not upon a throne. When he returned to New York to close that old chapter, Travis stood in his 60-story glass office, the place where he had once signed deals that made stock prices soar like fireworks. Everything looked the same. The desk, the abstract paintings, the silent trophies. Only he was different. He called a board meeting, his voice low but calm. I'll be selling most of my controlling shares. I'm no longer the right person to take this company where it needs to go. A director stood up, red-faced. Mr. Holt, do you even understand the price you're about to pay? Travis replied slowly. I've already paid the highest price, turning my back on my son. The rest are just numbers. The room fell silent. The divestment process lasted 3 months, slower than any deal he had ever managed, but he made it slow on purpose, as if repentance needed its own pace. The press mocked him. The billionaire who went soft for a baby? He didn't respond. He learned that some things can only be defended by time. The money he earned was immense, enough to build another world, this time not for himself. A new sign hung over the door of a small rented office. Caleb Foundation. On the day he signed the founding papers, he brought his son along. Caleb sat on his lap, holding an oversized pen, blotting ink across the edge of the document. That's the most beautiful signature in the world, Travis said with a laugh, and the whole room joined in. The foundation's idea had taken shape through sleepless nights, temporary housing for single mothers during the first 3 months after birth, vocational scholarships for women seeking independence, psychological care for victims of trauma, milk and healthcare assistance for underprivileged infants. He set one unbreakable rule: don't ask them why they're here. Ask what they need to leave stronger. One afternoon, Travis and Lila visited the first center in the Bronx. The house, once an abandoned preschool, had been repainted pale yellow with wide sunlit windows. The smell of fresh paint still lingered, but the yard already echoed with children's laughter. A young woman holding a newborn approached, shyly saying, "If this place didn't exist, I wouldn't know where to go." Travis smiled gently. "You don't owe anyone here. Stay as long as you need. And when you're ready, come back, teach someone else how to stand again." The girl laughed through her tears, and Lila, standing beside him, realized that for the first time in his life, Travis Holt wasn't using money to prove something. He was using it to heal. Word spread. A TV program showed Travis awkwardly holding a crying toddler, a cartoon sticker stuck to his forehead. Social media didn't mock him this time. Instead, people shared their own stories: a mother in Texas receiving baby formula, a survivor of domestic violence, finding a job through the foundation, a 3-year-old sleeping safely for the first time. Travis Holt's reputation wasn't restored, it was reborn. When a journalist asked him, "Are you doing all this to save your image?" he simply replied, "Reputation once blinded me. Now I want to use it to light the way for others." The words fell softly, like rain hitting a cracked surface, and the crack began to close. Summer in Vermont arrived in full bloom. The yard glowed under the sun. Caleb ran around with a small pinwheel, laughter echoing across the grass. Lila set a basket of pastries on the porch table, watching Travis tinker with a child's swing. "Let me help," she teased. "No, let me," he grinned. "Give me a chance to fix something small after breaking something big." She stopped, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "We don't need perfect, just persistence." That evening, they sat on the porch, the wind rustling through the meadow. Travis unfolded the foundation's first-year plan, pages full of numbers. "Tell me, should this one be near a hospital? That one near a trade school? I'm afraid I still see life as a spreadsheet." "Spreadsheets are useful," Lila smiled, "but people don't fit into boxes. We'll learn as we go." She studied him quietly. The way he tilted his head in thought, the stillness when Caleb learned a new word. Those small things stitched him back together, like slow, steady stitches in torn fabric. Night fell. Travis stood on the porch looking up at the stars. I used to think happiness lived at the top, he said softly. Now I know it lives low, where I kneel to tie my son's shoes, where I carry soup into a room that smells of cheap detergent, where I feel useful without needing my name in lights. Lila leaned her head on his shoulder. Happiness is found where you choose to stay. He smiled faintly. Thank you for opening the door. Not me, she laughed. Caleb did. A son teaches his father how to love. I just assigned the homework. Their laughter melted into the night. Quiet, warm, real. On the Caleb Foundation's opening day, the rain returned. Gentle, cleansing rain. The small hall was filled with wildflowers in glass jars, black and white photos on the walls, a mother holding her child, a graduation from a baking class, a dormitory lined with clean white beds. Travis's speech lasted only 3 minutes. People ask why I named it Caleb, not Holt. Because Holt is the past, and Caleb is the future. I used my name to build walls. Now I use my sons to open doors. He looked into the crowd. Lila nodded softly. Caleb was busy tugging at the red ribbon, his silver-gray eyes sparkling beneath the applause. Reputation once blinded me, Travis said, voice steady. Now I want to use it to light the way for others. And if I ever forget why, remind me to look into my son's eyes. In the back row, an old journalist set down his pen and simply sat there for a long while. The next day, his article ran with the headline, "The Man Who Sold His Company to Buy Back the Right to Be a Father." That afternoon, they returned to Vermont. They stopped by the lake. Caleb ran ahead, shoes soaked, laughing as he chased a wild duck. Lila tugged Travis's hand, pointing to the water. Their reflections merged, drifted apart, and merged again. Do you remember the first time you looked at him? I do, he said. It felt like looking into a mirror. Only this time, I wanted the reflection to be proud of me. She squeezed his hand. Today, I am proud. A soft breeze rose, the sun slipping below the horizon, leaving a faint streak of pink, a quiet promise that tomorrow would begin again with something small. Caleb ran back, hugged his father's leg, and looked up, silver-gray eyes shining. In them, Travis saw a different man, not a billionaire, not a symbol, but a father learning how to live kindly. Let's go home, Lila whispered. Yeah, Travis said, lifting his son and kissing the boy's soft hair. Tomorrow there are still people waiting for the light. A summer morning bathed Vermont in golden light. The lake was still as glass, reflecting the deep blue sky and the slow drift of white clouds. Along a small tree-lined path, 3 figures walked side by side. Travis, Lila, and Caleb. The grass was damp with dew, rich with the scent of new earth. Caleb ran ahead, a reed in his hand, laughing as he went. His laughter carried through the air so pure and bright that it felt as though the whole world softened around it. Lila stopped by the lakeshore, eyes lifted toward her son. Sunlight streamed through the leaves, falling gently across the boy's shoulders. Caleb's silver-gray eyes caught the light, shimmering like the water. Clear, calm, and impossibly alive. She spoke softly, her voice tender but full of meaning. You know, she said, his eyes are the one thing you could never deny. Travis smiled and took her hand. His palm was no longer cold like it once had been, but warm, steady, the hand of a man who had lost everything and learned how to love again. He looked out across the lake, his tone low, serene. Thank you for giving me the chance, and for teaching me how to love. Lila squeezed his hand gently but said nothing. She didn't need to. All the apologies, all the regrets, all the words that once stood between them had already dissolved into the quiet life they now shared. Now there were only 3 souls in a peaceful morning, where love no longer needed to be defined, only lived. Caleb came running back, holding out a small round stone. Daddy, throw it! Travis crouched down, smiling. He took the stone and tossed it lightly. It skipped across the water. Once, twice, 3 times. 3 skips, Caleb shouted. Just like us. Lila laughed, tears glimmering in her eyes. That simple, innocent remark was the truest testament to everything they had survived. The mistakes, the distance, and the forgiveness, all merging together like the three ripples spreading across the lake. A soft breeze drifted by, carrying the scent of wildflowers. Travis bent down and lifted Caleb onto his shoulders. The boy wrapped his arms around his father's neck, laughing, his hair brushing against Travis's cheek. In that fleeting moment, Travis closed his eyes, wondering how he had ever lived without knowing this kind of simple joy. Lila walked beside them, watching father and son, her heart calm and full. She knew there would still be challenges, ordinary days, and rainy nights ahead. But there was no fear anymore, because this love had already been proven true. The sun climbed higher, spreading light across the lake. Travis reached for Lila's hand again. The sunlight reflected in both their eyes, the same color, the same glow, as the light in their sons. It was the light of truth, of trust, and of forgiveness.